They say every king has a price. For some, it's gold. For others, power. But for the Wolf King of the Northern Peaks, the price was something far more dangerous, something that lived beneath the waves and sang in a voice that could shatter mountains. This is the story of a ruler who gave up everything for a love that should never have existed. In the age before maps had names and before men built their fragile cities of wood and wishful thinking, there existed a kingdom that most humans never saw. It stretched across the northern peaks, a range of mountains so ancient that even the rocks had forgotten their own creation. This was the domain of the wolf clans, packs that could walk on two legs when the moon was right, speak in tongues older than Latin, and remember grudges that lasted centuries. At the heart of this kingdom ruled Aldrich the Unyielding. He wasn't called the Unyielding because he was stubborn, though he was. He earned that name because in 300 years of life he had never once bent his knee to another living creature. Not to rival packs, not to the ancient bear lords of the eastern forests, not even to the vampire courts that occasionally sent their pale ambassadors with offers of alliance that always sounded suspiciously like threats. Aldrich's pack numbered in the thousands. His territory spanned 7 mountain ranges. His howl could be heard from one end of his kingdom to the other, a sound that made elk freeze mid-step and sent smaller predators scrambling for their dens. He was, by every measure that mattered to his kind, the perfect king. But perfection, as any good story will tell you, is just another word for hasn't fallen apart yet. Here's something most stories about kings don't tell you. Being in charge is exhausting. Every morning, Aldrich woke before dawn to patrol the western border, where a rival pack had been testing their boundaries. Every afternoon, he settled disputes, whose hunting grounds were whose, which younglings had disrespected their elders, whether the autumn hunt should begin on the full moon or the new moon. Every evening, he met with his council of elders, who all had opinions about everything and agreed on nothing. And every night he stood alone on the highest peak of his territory and looked out over a kingdom that stretched farther than most wolves could run in a week and felt nothing. Not pride, not satisfaction, just nothing. He had everything a wolf could want: respect, fear, power, a bloodline so pure that pups from other packs would spend their entire lives trying to prove themselves worthy of joining it. He had won every challenge, survived every threat, outlasted every enemy. So why did it feel like he was slowly turning to stone? His beta, a grizzled wolf named Torin, who had fought beside him for 2 centuries, noticed it first. "You're distracted," Torin said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of blood and gold. "Your mind isn't here anymore." Aldrich didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight Torin had never heard before. "How many more sunsets do you think we'll see, old friend?" "Thousands if we're lucky, hundreds if we're not. And they'll all look exactly like this one." Torin studied his king with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. "You're bored." "I'm dying," Aldrich corrected, "just very, very slowly."
The night everything changed started like any other. A storm rolled in from the western sea, the kind that turns the sky black at noon and makes even the bravest wolves think twice about leaving their dens. But Aldrich had never been like other wolves. While his pack sheltered in the caves and hollows of the mountain, he climbed. He wanted to feel the wind, wanted it to remind him that he was still alive, still capable of feeling something, even if it was just cold rain against fur and the sting of lightning-charged air. He reached the summit just as the storm reached its peak. Rain fell in sheets, thunder cracked like the mountains themselves were splitting open. And somewhere beneath all that chaos, he heard it. Singing. Not the howling of wind through rocks, not the whistling of air through canyon gaps. This was deliberate, structured, a melody that seemed to slip between the raindrops and wrap around his bones. It was coming from the west, from the direction of the sea. Now, Aldrich knew about the ocean. Every wolf did. It was the place where their territory ended, where the mountains finally gave up their hold on the land and surrendered to something vast and unknowable. The wolf clans didn't go to the sea. That was the agreement, made so long ago that nobody even remembered who had agreed to it. The mountains belonged to wolves, the sea belonged to others. But that voice, it called to something in him that he'd forgotten existed, something that had nothing to do with being a king or a warrior or the alpha of the strongest pack in the north. It called to the part of him that was just Aldrich, the part that wanted instead of ruled, the part that wondered instead of commanded. He made a decision that would doom his kingdom. He followed the voice. The journey down from the peaks to the sea took 3 days. For a human, it would have taken 3 weeks if they survived at all. The path, if you could even call it that, wound through territories that belonged to things that had never been wolves and never would be, past the caves where the blind white bears hibernated for decades at a time, through the Valley of Echoes where sounds from 100 years ago still bounced off the cliffs, across the Bone Bridge, a natural arch of stone that spanned a chasm so deep that wolves who fell into it were said to still be falling. Aldrich traveled in his human form, something he rarely did anymore. It was weaker, slower, more vulnerable to the elements. But it was also quieter, more able to move through spaces where a full-sized wolf would struggle. And more importantly, some instinct he couldn't name told him that whatever waited at the sea would want to see him like this, as a man, not a monster. He reached the coast on the 3rd day, just as the sun was setting. The ocean was nothing like he'd imagined. He'd expected it to be like the mountain lakes, still, reflective, bordered by familiar stone. Instead, he found something that moved like a living thing, waves that crashed against black rocks with enough force to shake the ground, water that stretched to the horizon without end, dark and deep and full of secrets that had never known sunlight. And standing on a rock that jutted out into the tide, her tail still in the water and her upper body bare to the dying light, was the mermaid. She was singing. Here's what Aldrich saw. Hair the color of kelp forests, moving in the wind like it was still underwater. Eyes that reflected light like a fish's, catching and throwing back the sunset in shades of silver and gold. Skin that seemed to shift between human pale and scale-patterned, depending on how the light hit it. And that tail, iridescent, powerful, definitely not human, definitely not entirely fish either. Something in between, something other. She stopped singing when she saw him. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. A wolf king in human skin and a mermaid half out of her element, both of them caught in a moment that felt like the world had paused to watch what would happen next. She spoke first. "You're far from your mountains, wolf." Her voice was the same one he'd heard in the storm. It seemed to resonate in his chest, like it was coming from inside him instead of from her. "You called me," he said. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. "I've been calling for 300 years. You're the first one who answered." Her name was Marina, though that wasn't exactly it. Her real name was something in the deep tongue, the language merfolk spoke in the trenches where sunlight had never reached. But Marina was close enough. It meant of the sea, which was accurate if it wasn't complete. She told him she was the youngest daughter of the Sea King who ruled the northern waters, that she'd been singing to the shore for centuries, hoping one of the land dwellers would be curious enough, brave enough, stupid enough to answer, that she was tired of the deep, tired of the cold, tired of the endless politics of underwater courts where everyone moved slowly and spoke in riddles and nothing ever changed.
"I want to see the sun," she said. "Not just from underwater where everything's blue and dim. I want to feel it, warm and direct and real." Aldrich understood that better than she knew. "I can show you the mountains," he said. "The peaks where the sun hits first every morning, where the light is so bright it hurts." She smiled. It transformed her face from merely beautiful to something that made his breath catch. "I can show you the deep," she countered.
Places where the water is so clear you can see for miles, where fish glow in the dark and the currents sing songs older than your kingdom. They talked until the moon rose, about territories and loneliness and what it meant to be trapped by the thing you were supposed to want. She told him about pressure and darkness and the weight of water. He told her about wind and stone and the weight of crowns. When dawn came, they were still talking, and somewhere in those hours between dusk and dawn, they both made the same realization. They'd found the one creature in the world who understood what it meant to rule something vast and ancient and suffocating, and wished desperately to be anything else. What followed was the strangest courtship in the history of either kingdom. Aldrich couldn't live in the sea, Marina couldn't live in the mountains, so they met in between. Every night for 3 months, Aldrich made the 3-day journey from his peaks to the shore. Every night, Marina swam up from whatever trench or reef or underwater palace she called home. They met on that same rock, the one that jutted out into the tide, and they talked like they were trying to fit entire lifetimes into a few hours. She taught him about the ocean, how it had moods like a living thing, calm one moment and rage-filled the next, how there were cities beneath the waves, built from coral and bone and shipwrecks, populated by merfolk who'd never seen land, how the deep was full of things that even she feared, creatures so old and strange that they'd forgotten they'd ever been anything else. He taught her about the mountains, how each peak had its own personality, welcoming or hostile depending on the season, how the wolf packs had laws older than human civilization, passed down through howls and stories and blood, how the forest was full of magic that humans had forgotten, but animals still remembered. But more than that, they taught each other how to want something, not the vague dissatisfaction that had plagued them both for centuries, real, specific, desperate wanting, the kind that makes you stupid, the kind that makes you willing to trade everything you have for a chance at something different. Aldrich's pack noticed his absences. Of course they did. You don't vanish for 3 days every week without people asking questions. Torin confronted him on the mountain one evening, blocking the path down with his considerable bulk. "Where do you go?" "Away." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." Torin's eyes narrowed. "You're meeting someone. I can smell it on you when you return. Salt and something else, something not wolf." Aldrich could have lied, could have made up a story about scouting distant territories or investigating threats, but he was tired of lying, tired of being the unyielding when all he wanted was to bend. "I met a mermaid," he said simply. "I'm in love with her." The silence that followed was the kind that usually comes before violence, but Torin just sighed, a long, tired sound that seemed to carry the weight of too many years. "Of course you are, because why would anything about you ever be simple?" Marina's father found out around the same time. The Sea King was old, not centuries old like Aldrich or Marina, millennia old. He'd been swimming these waters when humans were still living in caves, and wolves were just wolves, nothing more. He'd seen empires rise from the ocean floor and sink back into it. He'd watched species evolve and go extinct. He'd outlived more children than most creatures could count, and he was not pleased. He summoned Marina to the Deep Palace, a sprawling structure of coral and pearl that sat in a trench so deep that the pressure would kill any surface dweller instantly. When she arrived, he was waiting in his throne room, surrounded by guards with spears made from narwhal tusks and ancient grudges. "You've been going to the surface." Not a question, an accusation. "Yes." "Meeting with the Wolf King?" "Yes." "Do you know what you're risking? The treaty between our peoples has held for 5,000 years. 5,000 years of peace because we agreed to stay separate. Land for them, sea for us. And you're throwing that away for what? Puppy love?" Marina's eyes flashed, literally, bioluminescence flickering across her irises like lightning through clouds. "It's not puppy love, and I'm not a child."
You're 300 years old. You're barely out of your scales. I'm old enough to know what I want, and I want him." The Sea King studied her daughter for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, sadder. "You can't have him, Marina. Not in any way that matters. He can't live in the water. You can't live on land. That's not politics. That's biology."
"There are stories." "Stories," her father interrupted, "are how we teach children that the world is fair. But you're old enough to know better. The world isn't fair. It just is. And what is, in this case, is that you're a mermaid and he's a wolf, and there's no magic strong enough to change that. Not permanently, not without a price you can't afford to pay." But Marina was her father's daughter, stubborn, willful, convinced that wanting something badly enough could bend reality. "Then I'll pay it," she said. There was magic in the world back then. Not the sanitized, sparkly kind from children's books, the real kind, the kind with teeth. And if you wanted that kind of magic, you went to the places where the world was thin, where reality got tired and stopped paying attention. Places like the tide pools at the edge of the world, where something old and patient waited for desperate creatures to come asking for the impossible. The witch who lived there didn't have a name, not one that could be spoken in any language that had grammar, anyway. She was something that had been old when the world was new, something that existed in the space between water and air, life and death, possible and impossible. Marina found her 3 days after her confrontation with her father. Aldrich found her the same night, having followed Marina's scent through currents and tides that should have drowned him. They stood before the witch together, holding hands because they were both terrified and wouldn't admit it. The witch looked at them with eyes that were too many and not enough all at the same time. "You want to be together," the witch said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," they answered as one. "You understand this is impossible." "Yes." "And you're asking me to make it possible anyway." "Yes." The witch made a sound that might have been laughter or might have been the ocean dying. It was hard to tell with beings that old. "I can give you what you want. I can make it so you can be together. I can give the mermaid lungs and legs. I can give the wolf gills and fins. I can transform you both into something new, something that can exist in both worlds, or neither, depending on how you look at it." Hope flared in Marina's chest. Aldrich's hand tightened on hers. "But," the witch continued, "magic has rules, prices, the kind you can't haggle with." "Name it," Aldrich said. For Marina to walk on land, she must give up her voice, the thing that called you here in the first place, the thing that makes her who she is. She'll be able to speak, but she'll never sing again. And in the deep, songs are how we remember. Without her voice, the ocean will forget her. She'll be able to visit, but she'll never truly belong again.
Marina swallowed hard but nodded. "And for Aldrich? For the Wolf King to swim in the deep, he must give up his crown, his position, his pack. He can never lead them again, can never howl the Alpha's call, can never return to the peaks as anything more than a stranger. He'll be able to visit, but he'll never truly belong again." The silence that followed was heavy enough to drown in. This was the price, not gold or blood or firstborn children, something worse, identity, belonging, the thing that defined them. Marina would lose her voice, her connection to her people, her history, her magic. Aldrich would lose his crown, his authority, his pack, his purpose. They would have each other, but they would have nothing else. They would be together, but they would be alone. They didn't answer right away. The witch didn't rush them. Time meant nothing to something that old. She simply waited,
patient as the tide, while they wrestled with the choice that would define the rest of their lives. Aldrich spoke first. "If I keep my crown, I'll live another 1,000 years ruling wolves who respect me but don't know me. I'll watch the same sunsets from the same peaks. I'll settle the same disputes and fight the same challenges and feel nothing while I do it. I'll be powerful and feared and completely, utterly alone." Marina's turn. "If I keep my voice, I'll spend another 1,000 years singing to an ocean that's too big to hear me. I'll attend court functions where everyone speaks but nobody says anything. I'll be my father's daughter and the sea's princess and nothing that's actually mine." They looked at each other, really looked, seeing not the king or the princess, not the wolf or the mermaid, but the person underneath, the lonely, desperate, half-alive person who'd spent centuries going through the motions of a life they didn't want. "I'll trade my crown," Aldrich said. "I'll trade my voice," Marina agreed. The witch smiled. It was not a comforting expression. "Then it's done." What happened next was not pleasant. Magic never is, not when it's changing something fundamental about what you are. Marina screamed as her tail split and reformed into legs. Aldrich howled as his lungs restructured to pull oxygen from water. Their blood burned, their bones creaked, their very cells rebelled against the transformation. But when it was over, when the magic finally released them and left them gasping on the shore, they were changed. Marina stood on legs that had never walked, wobbling like a newborn deer. Aldrich breathed water like air, his lungs pulling in brine like it was mountain wind. They could touch each other now, really touch, without the barrier of water or air or biology between them. Marina ran her hands through Aldrich's hair. Aldrich pressed his forehead against hers, and somewhere in the distance a wolf pack howled, confused, searching for their king. And somewhere in the deep, a father grieved for a daughter who would never come home. The wolf kingdom fell apart without Aldrich. Not immediately. Tauren tried to hold it together. He was strong and wise and respected, but he wasn't Aldrich. He didn't have 3 centuries of earned authority. He didn't have the bloodline or the presence or the sheer force of will that had kept thousands of wolves unified. Within a year, the kingdom had splintered into a dozen smaller packs. Within 5 years, those packs were at war with each other over territory and pride and ancient grudges that Aldrich had kept suppressed through nothing but the weight of his name. The northern peaks became a battleground. The mountains ran red with wolf blood. Everything Aldrich had built over 3 centuries crumbled back to chaos in less than a decade.
Tauren died defending the main den from a rival pack. His last words were reportedly, he chose love over duty. I still don't know if that makes him brave or a coward. The Sea Kingdom mourned Marina differently. Her father had the court musicians play her songs, the ones she'd sung before she met the wolf. They echoed through the trenches and canyons of the deep, beautiful and haunting and utterly devoid of the thing that had made them special. Marina's voice, Marina's presence, Marina's unique way of finding melody in the chaos of the current. The Sea King lived another 1,000 years. He never forgave his daughter for leaving, but he never forgot her either. In the throne room of the deep palace, there's still a painting of Marina, made from crushed pearls and pressed against coral. She's young in it, still innocent, still singing. Her father visited it every day until he finally died. But Marina and Aldrich, they disappeared. Here's where the story gets fuzzy because nobody knows for sure what happened to them. Some say they went to the places between, the tide pools and coastal caves where land meets sea and neither element fully dominates, that they built a life there in the margins, belonging to neither world but content in each other. Others say the transformation was never complete,
that Marina's legs never stopped aching for the ocean, that Aldrich's lungs never fully adjusted to water, that they spent years together but never stopped grieving what they'd lost. There are stories of fishermen who claim to see them sometimes on foggy mornings when the line between sea and shore blurs, a woman with kelp-colored hair teaching herself to walk, a man with wolf-gold eyes learning to swim without fighting the current. Some versions say they were happy, that love was enough, that they found in each other something worth more than kingdoms or voices or crowns. Other versions are darker. They say Marina eventually threw herself back into the deep, unable to live without her voice, without her songs, without the ocean's embrace. That Aldrich followed her down and drowned trying to bring her back. That they died together, wrapped in each other's arms, in water too deep for sunlight to reach. The truth, as usual, is probably somewhere in between. But here's what we know for certain. There was a king who gave up his crown. There was a princess who gave up her voice, and there was a love that was strong enough to reshape two people, but not strong enough to reshape the world around them. So what's the lesson here? Because every story has one, even if it's not the one you expected. Is it that love conquers all? No, love conquered them, but it didn't conquer biology or politics or the basic reality that some things are incompatible no matter how badly you want them not to be. Is it that duty should come before desire? Maybe, but what kind of life is it, ruling over something you've stopped caring about, going through the motions of power while your soul slowly petrifies? Is it that compromise is necessary? Partially, but what they did wasn't compromise. Compromise is meeting in the middle. What they did was throw away everything they had for a chance at something new, with no guarantee it would work. The real lesson, if there is one, is this: every choice has a cost. Every transformation requires something to be left behind. You can't become something new while still clinging to everything old. And sometimes the price of becoming who you want to be is giving up who you are. Aldrich and Marina understood that. They looked at the cost, everything they'd ever known, everything they'd ever been, and decided the chance of being something different was worth it. Were they right? That depends on what you value. If you think identity is sacred, that you should never abandon who you are for someone else, then they were fools who destroyed themselves and their kingdoms for a fantasy. If you think freedom matters more than duty, that being true to what you want is worth any price, then they were heroes who had the courage to choose themselves over obligation.
Most of us will never face a choice that stark. We'll never have to choose between our crown and our heart, between our voice and our love. But we'll face smaller versions of that choice every day. Do I stay where I'm safe or go where I'm happy? Do I keep doing what I'm good at or try something I actually want? Do I be who people expect or who I actually am? And maybe the story of the Wolf King and the Mermaid is just a reminder that those choices matter, that what we're willing to trade defines us more than what we're willing to keep. There's one more version of the story. It's not the most popular one, it doesn't show up in many of the old texts, but it's the one I choose to believe. In this version, Marina and Aldrich did build a life together, not in the mountains or the deep, but in a cottage on a cliff overlooking the sea, a place where they could see both their old kingdoms, the peaks in the distance, the ocean stretching to the horizon. They had 50 years together, maybe not long by wolf or merfolk standards, but long by any human measure, long enough to learn each other's languages, both spoken and unspoken, long enough to build something that was theirs, with no kingdom or crown or court to tell them who they had to be. Marina never sang again, but she hummed. Aldrich never howled again, but he laughed. And maybe that was enough. They died on the same day, some say, walked into the ocean together, hand in hand, and just kept walking until the water closed over their heads. Their bodies were never found,
But sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is full and the tide is high, people claim they can hear something in the waves. Not singing exactly, but not silence either. Something in between, something that sounds like two voices, wolf and water, finally learning to speak the same language. So here's my question for you. What would you trade? Not for love necessarily, though that's part of it, but for the chance to be something other than what you are right now. For the opportunity to shed the crown, or find your voice, or walk away from the kingdom that's slowly crushing you under its weight. What price would you pay to become yourself? Think about it. And while you're thinking, if this story made you feel something, anything, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more stories about the choices that define us and the prices we pay for becoming who we're meant to be. And leave a comment telling me, are you Team Aldrich, who gave up his crown, Team Marina, who gave up her voice, or Team they were both idiots but I respect it? Because at the end of the day, that's all any story is, a mirror, a chance to see yourself in someone else's impossible choice and ask, what would I do? Thanks for listening, and remember, crowns are heavy, voices are precious, but sometimes the only way to breathe is to dive into water that was never meant to hold you and trust that love, or something like it, will teach you how to swim. Until next time.